Welcome to Local Football Flavor, the show where we look at the fact that most fans know already. The national media gets stuff wrong about your individual team, but the problem is they're not just doing it to your team, they're doing it to every single team in the league. And here at Local Football Flavor, we talk to local fans to get you that missing information, help you do better on your waiver wires, and to help you do better in your bets. Today, we're going to be talking the San Francisco 49ers. And with the Niners, our partner here, our guest is going to be from Portland. His name's Doug. He's been a long-time Niners fan. He began following them back in the glory days of Montana, then later developed this deep appreciation of how Bill Walsh changed football from what he calls a melee medieval sport to a multi-dimensional game of chess. So we're going to continue that line of question with how is Shanahan doing this run game that's making everyone have no idea how to work. And then what is Shanahan's actual tendencies? Why does no one ever know what running back to pick for fantasy? And where are they going to go this year? What's going on with Jimmy Garoppolo? And are they going to overcome the Rams? All of that and more coming up on this episode of Local Football Flavors, San Francisco 49ers. Welcome to Local Football Flavor, where we talk to local fans to get the real information of what's going on with their team. And welcome, everyone. Here we are for another episode here. I'm Joe Rocky with Bob Heichu, and today's our guest here, Doug Utberg. Sorry, I said your name wrong, Doug. But yeah, Niners. So why don't we kind of just jump right into them? You know,
okay, gotcha.
How much you love the sophistication that they brought into the NFL, which I guess is kind of a San Francisco thing to be proud of. So Why don't we just start there and go from there?
Yeah, well, and it's so. First of all, that was a just truly epic intro. I have a little bit of intro envy, but I'm just going to keep it in check. Okay, so kind of talking about Bill Walsh and the West Coast offense. I don't want to dwell on it too much, but what it really comes down to is figuring out what are the tendencies in the rest of the league, and then because any tendency you have, whether your tendency is towards speed, if your tendency is towards speed and that's overvalued, that means size will be undervalued. If your tendency is toward big, then that means that people who are smaller will be undervalued. Anytime there's one set of skills that's highly valued, that means there will be another set of skills that will be undervalued. And the taxonomy of the league is, and this is, I think, the Kyle Shanahan magic sprinkles, is really about figuring out, being able to dynamically figure out what is, what's overvalued in the league, what's undervalued in the league, and then how do you build your game plan to be able to successfully capitalize on, on the systemic weaknesses that other teams are creating based on the way they're structured, their game plan, depth chart, etc. I think in the 1980s, West Coast offense did this because at the time the ethos was cannon arm quarterbacks, deep passing, and then, enormous offensive line, big beefy running backs, and just slamming running backs into the line to gain 3 to 4 yards. And if you got more than three times, you got a first down, you just do it again. And then as soon as the safeties come in, you try to throw a bomb over the top. What was it? Terry Bradshaw won 4 Super Bowls doing it that way.
Sure did.
Of course, the problem is if you don't have a big beefy offensive line, if you don't have a cannon arm quarterback, does that just mean you can't win? And that was the Bill Walsh innovation. He said that, okay, well, you can, if you have a quarterback who can make really quick throws, but doesn't necessarily have a lot of long distance arm accuracy, you can control the clock not by running, but with short, exquisitely timed passes. Now, of course, then everybody else copied on it. They caught on. West Coast, Bill Walsh style West Coast isn't as effective as it once was. You have to continue evolving it, and that's actually a lot of what Kyle Shanahan has done with the run game. I think particularly with I think he's taken the Mike Shanahan idea of zone blocking schemes and is taking it to another level. I think the Niner run game is really more about the blocking schemes than the running back, which of course is maddening from a fantasy football perspective because you don't have the old LaDainian Tomlinson feature back who will get 1,800 yards and 25 touchdowns. Those days are over.
Most of the league, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but of course, the Shanahan run model is that, any individual back will usually have between about like 600 and 800 yards, about, 4 to 8 touchdowns, which is trash from a fantasy perspective, but the team will have like about 2,000 to 3,000 yards and about 15 to 25 touchdowns. This is amazing.
It is. So on that point, it seems that the reason they change running back so much is because they always get hurt. Is that just an outside misconception, or is that the way it is?
Well, I mean, and I think so. The short answer is that is the way it is, but that's actually kind of always been the way it is. It's just that I think that people have a what's the thing? There's an availability heuristic where people think about feature backs like say Emmitt Smith, where he was essentially the feature back for the Dallas Cowboys forever. However, as time has gone on, what we've seen is that the shelf life of the running back has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. The average running back comes into the NFL. I think the average one will make it like 3 years. A good one will make it 5 to 7, and an excellent one will crack 10. There are very few running backs who make it in the NFL more than 10 years, just because it's an extremely physically taxing role. And so I think the thing that both Mike and Kyle Shanahan did, that Mike Shanahan started first, principally with the Denver Broncos, but he got started with the 49ers, but in the mid 90s. What he did was he made the running game more about the blocking scheme than about the backs themselves, because I think what he aptly figured out is that your probability of injury is extremely high, and if your team is dependent on a single feature back, you have a very key weakness point. I mean, and another thing too is just the evolution of NFL rules have been moving further and further toward protecting quarterbacks. I mean, I can't even fathom what would happen if somebody like Joe Montana could be reincarnated today, because they just got pummeled back in the 80s. There was no protection at all for quarterbacks.
I'm pretty sure he was. His name's Brady.
Yeah. Oh, well, exactly. That's just it, and so, but yeah, the rules have evolved to favor passing, to provide more protection for quarterbacks, more protection for receivers. There's not really a lot of additional protections for running backs. I mean, kind of, but running backs still get lit up when they get tackled pretty frequently. And so, what that ends up doing is that just ends up driving a higher probability of injury. And so I think that from a it's like from a kind of risk mitigation or you're trying to get your maximum expected value for wins. What you want to avoid building your team around a single feature back, just because that will end up being a very fragile. That'll just end up being a very fragile game plan.
Well, Doug, I've got a question for you. So when we think about scheme and we think about blocking, how is this going to affect Trey Lance's potential in the NFL? When we look at Trey Lance, we know that he has the moves. We know he has legs. And if we look at a previous San Francisco quarterback in recent memory, Colin Kaepernick, they were very successful when they had a quarterback that was mobile. And, the Nick Mullins experiment when Jimmy G got hurt was just downright awful. But even Jimmy G was moderately successful for the 49ers too. So how does the scheme affect the mobile quarterback? And do you think Trey Lance has the ability to elevate the 49ers to the next level in the way that a lot of fans think that he can?
And so I think the short answer to that question is that it will all depend on how his read progressions come. Because as you said, Colin Kaepernick did very well for about 1.5 seasons. And then what happened was people exposed the fact that he wasn't able to do read progressions. People figured out all you had to do was key on his first option. Once you shut down his first option, he'd start running before he went to the second option. So I suppose I may be in a minority, because people think that it's a conspiracy that Colin Kaepernick was never picked up. It's not. He's not that good of a quarterback. He's a freakish athlete, but he's not that good of a quarterback. He doesn't do read progressions. If you're going to succeed as a quarterback in the NFL, you have to do read progressions. You have to know who your first, second, third, fourth, and fifth options are. And then you have to be consistently rereading to see if somebody who you thought was closed down is now opened up. If you only go to one option, you're done. You might be able to last for another season if you have speed, but if you can only read one, you're finished. That's why Vince Young never made it that far. He didn't do read progressions. If you can do 2 read progressions, you might make it a little longer. But in order to, Tom Brady can read all 5 players on the field without moving his eyes. That's why he's so good. Nobody knows where he's going to throw, and he sees the entire field looking straight down the looking straight at the goalpost. And so that's really what it comes down to: is will Trey Lance be able to do the read progressions? If he does, and he capitalizes on his athleticism, he'll be unstoppable. If he doesn't, people figure him out.
So the one thing that comes with read progressions is really experience. I mean, most rookies can't do that. We're sitting here in Pittsburgh. We're the ones who drafted the first round rookie, and he can't do it at all. Guys, he's never hitting the field in terms of Kenny Pickett.
But he's not a first round rookie either.
He's 25 years old. You're right. He should have been in the league for like 4 years by now. But my question with Lance is that even though he's not a rookie, he's only played basically 3 seasons since he's been 18. So because of COVID, he only played 1 year in college and he didn't play last year. Is there a belief that he's going to be able to pick up this read progression or is Shanahan going to have to water the thing down so much that it almost takes it back to Kaepernick where it's one and done, one and run?
Yeah, well, and now I think this is actually one of the places where I think Kyle Shanahan will be a benefit to Trey Lance versus, say, somebody like Jim Harbaugh. Not that I have anything against Jim Harbaugh, but what Shanahan, what he's really good at doing is flexing the complexity of his offense. And so what I would foresee Shanahan doing is basically instilling the offense essentially in chunks as Trey Lance progresses. Now, I think the good part about Lance sitting on the shelf for the last couple of seasons is that he presumably he's had a lot of time to study. The bad part is that you can't practice getting hit in a game, right? You are actually, according to NFL rules, you are not allowed to mimic the intensity of a real game in a practice. So what that means is I think that Lance will and does have a grasp of the playbook. The question is going to be, can he make those, can he do that nanosecond decision making that you need as an NFL quarterback to really be successful?
And then in terms of his temperament, is he going to be like Teddy Two Gloves where he's scared to death to throw an interception? Or is he going to be thinking the other end of the extreme, Favre, where he will just trust everything and throw through a wall, and including I'll throw through 4 linebackers just to get it there?
And I think that the short answer is I haven't seen enough to really know. Right. I mean, generally speaking, I think that it really depends on what the on how the league ethos is going, because sometimes it's usually based on whoever is the most successful. Like when Favre was having good years, people said, "Oh, you have to take risks." On the other hand, when Brady was having good years, people say, "Oh, we have to protect the football." It's like, okay, well, it's not just one or the other, because so as a 49er fan, I spent a lot of time following Alex Smith, who really unfortunately was set up for failure for pretty much his whole career, and is far better than he was given credit for, but since he threw a ton of interceptions in his rookie season, I think he got really gun shy about pushing the ball down the field. His mindset got really heavily into protect the football. That's fine, but what that does is that makes you very dependent on your run game and dependent on on low risk big plays, which they had a fair amount of in Kansas City. But one of the things that Patrick Mahomes did was Patrick Mahomes was able to was willing to take more risk. And I think that understanding when the right time is to take more risk, to when the risk reward of going for a big play it makes a difference. I think that's another really key decision making factor, and it's not something where you can where you could just easily say, okay, well, you either need to go for it or you always need to play it safe. If you always play it safe, you're check down Charlie. I think that was the Brad Johnson nickname back in his Tampa Bay days. Yeah. Or it's like either that or you're the Mad Bomber. Which is great when it works. But the problem is, if all you do is chuck it deep, A, you're going to have a lot of 3 and outs, and B, you're really going to struggle in the red zone. I don't want to use the word cutting edge too much, but a cutting edge style of offense, which uses a lot of players in ways that are atypical. Most specifically, you think Deebo Samuel basically being used as a running back. You can't do that indefinitely. Eventually, he'll get injured, and and then you'll be losing a significant amount of time. So I would be really surprised if Deebo racks up as many rushing yards this season as he had last season. I'd be willing to bet he will have far more receiving yards this season than last season. This is, of course, if assuming that he doesn't get injured.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that a certain amount of that is an artifact of the fact that you have kind of a cutting edge style of offense. I think but then B, I think just elite athletics in general. I think I think results in a higher risk of injury than previously existed. I think about like racehorses, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry to turn the conversation. I promise that our tangent will be over in a minute.
That's fine.
But basically, thoroughbreds have essentially have been bred to go faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. Well, so what's ultimately happened is that the speed of thoroughbreds has gotten to the point where it eclipses the ability of their bones and joints to handle that. And so any racehorse that's running races will get injured eventually. It's just a question of whether they can make it past the Triple Crown or Breeders' Cup before those inevitable injuries from that level of speed happen. I think that there's a similar thing going on in the contemporary NFL, just because the size and speed of players, both on offense and defense, you have like 280-pound guys running a 4.40. Humans aren't meant to do that. Humans are not meant to do that. There's a fundamental violation of primary anatomy there, and so that in itself means you're living on borrowed time.
Well, that's fair enough. So in a
or you're living on Bosa time, right?
Exactly.
Well, actually, yeah. Let's switch that, because looking at the research of your team, which again, I'd like to thank the people over at Football Outsiders for giving me this, is that the Niners defense has some of these same innovations that most people don't look at. They led the league in unblocked sacks, which means they're scheming things and they're beating you with their mind rather than just having Bosa blow people up. So I want to start there when we talk about the defense, because they're doing a lot of innovative things there. It's not all working, but the things that they're getting really good at is fantastic. So take a second or two on the defense.
Sure. So, and I think defense is a part of football that's really easy to overlook because it's only one player on your fantasy team, and and it's like unless you end up getting a run back for a touchdown or you end up getting a fumble recovery for a touchdown, they rarely give you that much points. And just unfortunately, fandom is based on fantasy football these days. And so, because the way that I sort of think about, or the way that I think about defense is, there's of course, the traditional way to say is, okay, are you structured for run or structured for pass? But I think the other dimension is, are you structured to try to essentially outcompete the other team in a vanilla defense, or are you structured to try to out-scheme the other team? And I think the way the 49ers are approaching it is principally around trying to out-scheme, but of course they want anytime you have a player like Nick Bosa, then you obviously want to put them on your team. But I think things like unblocked sacks, what you're really trying to do with that is to add that extra quarter second to your quarterback's decision-making time, so that they have to check for somebody who's coming in unblocked. I think that's what they're really going for. Whereas I think the alternative to something like that is, my wife is a big Peyton Manning fan. So I think about when the Indianapolis Colts had their Super Bowl run in the 2006 season, right? They probably had the most vanilla defense like ever. It was a 4-3 cover 2, and they did the exact same thing every down. However, they had Dwight Freeney coming off the edge, and so he still racked up a good amount of stacks, even though people knew exactly what he was going to do. So I think that I don't know that one is necessarily superior to the other. The advantage of having a repeatable vanilla defense is that everybody knows exactly what they need to do, and it simply comes down to execution. I think the advantage of having a scheme-based defense is that you always have that opportunity to have a very significant disruption to the other team's tempo. And so I think that what it's, and this is my really long way of saying that, I think that what it's ultimately going to come down to, is whether those scheme-based disruptions can be timed optimally. Because it's like, I don't think the 49ers are going to have, a shutdown, 3 and out, 5 out of 10, 5 out of 6 series types of defense. That's just not how they're structured. That's just not how the NFL works these days anyway. But I think that, if they scheme and execute the way that they are, the way that they're built to, I think what they'll do is they will be able to stay in games and win games by, basically by creating unconventional stops at opportune times. Like for example, if you get a 3rd and 5 and your quarterback gets blown up by an unblocked blitzer, that's going to affect the rest of the game.
Okay. Right. Yeah. And when we think about that, Doug, when we look at the schedule ahead for the 49ers and we think about their division, Russell Wilson is gone, right? They're playing Stafford and the Rams twice. They still have to play Russell Wilson once. You're looking at Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Kyler Murray, potentially Jameis Winston. You have Justin Fields the first week. There's a lot of talent in the league at quarterback. And when you think about their scheme and their execution, what games are you worried about here? Which ones do you feel they have the potential to be really successful in? And which ones do you think that, you're like, oh man, that's the one I really am not looking forward to because it's definitely going to be rough?
Yeah, well, one of the things I've found is that every time I've tried to do this analysis at the beginning of the season, I am rarely correct more than 50% of the time.
Fair enough.
And so I'm not trying to throw cold water on the conversation, but generally speaking, my ability to predict these things is atrocious. I found that in any given season, there will be about 2 to 5 games where I think they have no chance that they'll pull it out. And there'll be another 2 to 3 games where I'm thinking, okay, they've got this one in the bag, and somehow it won't work out. It's like, generally speaking, I think that, there's a few teams where there's a material talent differential. Seattle comes to mind. Seattle's a bit of a dumpster fire right now. I'd be very surprised if they didn't figure out how to do a sweep there. However, for a number of the other teams, they're going to be playing a lot of talented teams. The question's going to be, how many of those talented teams are going to be working cohesively? Like I know, in the case of Los Angeles, I think that there's a really good chance they're going to experience Champions Curse, which is that historically, when teams win Super Bowls, they rarely come back. They rarely make it to the playoffs the next year unless Tom Brady's their quarterback. Yeah. And, I know that they've had some new additions, Odell Beckham Jr. In particular, which Odell Beckham is extremely talented. He is not known for being the best team player, nor
and he's not even on the team anymore, Doug.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, Allen Robinson is the new guy there from Chicago.
Okay. Oh, yeah. I guess so, I've been all right. I need to stop working and get on the forums more.
I mean, the reason I say that is it could be, they're with Stafford's elbow and everything that's going on in Los Angeles. The Rams necessarily aren't the team that, concern me as much for the 49ers as much as the Chargers and the Chiefs. The material talent on the Chargers and the Chiefs is, I think, I know the Rams fans will probably say that I'm wrong on this one, but I think is materially better, particularly the Chargers this year. I mean, they seem to only get in the way of themselves, but it looks like the back end of that schedule is a very winnable back end of the schedule minus Tampa Bay. So if all things work out well and everybody stays healthy, we could be looking at a good 49ers team here, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the Chiefs, I think that's going to be tough. There's no way for that not to be tough. Not only do they have talent, but they also have an exceptionally well-run team. I think, Andy Reid gets credit now, but, up until he actually had a Super Bowl ring, Andy Reid was probably, I would say, one of the most undervalued coaches in the NFL. He is a fantastically well-organized and meticulous game planner. The whole thing with the Chargers, I think Week 10 will be interesting because historically the Chargers have always come out really, really strong, and right about the middle to end of the season is usually when the struggles show up. I don't know that I can take information from the era of the Lord of No Rings and project it forward, but that's how that's historically how the Chargers work, because there's a part of me that was kind of a closet Chargers fan, just because I had some friends from the San Diego area, and I'd always watched them just implode in the second half of the season.
They would implode in the second half of games.
They would.
Yes.
And it's funny that some teams just have that culture, and not to get away from the Niners here, but it seems what the Chargers really are is they're trying to do what the Niners are in terms of being smarter than everyone. But I just don't think Steven's good enough to do that. Shanahan is. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I just don't think that they are. So I do the Survivor Leagues where you get to pick one team 1 week and then you can't use them again. So your answer basically was the Niners are going to beat Seattle because they're garbage fire. And that's a pretty common answer. I mean, Seattle isn't going to be doing good. But one of the things that I've always noticed, because I'm looking at one game a week and making sure I get it right, is there's this thing that's called the West Coast at 1 o'clock curse. So you obviously have seen, I'm in the East Coast, so that's 1 o'clock for us. It's 10 in the morning for you. Being a Niners fan, it's not like they don't ever do that. Is that just I just happen to be paying attention to it because it's when the Niners go play Atlanta, there's going to be a lot of people betting on the Niners because Atlanta is also a dumpster fire. But it's at 1 o'clock. So how much does that 1 o'clock thing actually affect the West Coast teams, specifically the Niners?
Well, kind of the way that I think about it, I think of it more as road travel than 1 o'clock, just because in order for the Niners to be playing at 1 o'clock, at 1 p.m. Eastern, that means that they're traveling, they're on the road, and usually they're traveling cross country. Anytime that you travel cross country for a game, that's good for at least, that's probably good for about 4 to 5 points on the spread. Just because it's very physically taxing, pushes you out of your rhythm. And so I think this, that's some of the places where we definitely have an opportunity for disruptions or for surprises, is because if you're going to say a talent poor team, but you're on the road, and especially since you have Atlanta, which is all the way on the East Coast, and you have San Francisco, which is all the way on the West Coast, you're talking about a 5-6 hour flight. That's, of course, these guys are used to it, but it still pushes you off your game. So I think, you definitely have some risk in some of those areas.
Fair enough. Well, we're going to continue this conversation, talk about fantasy on the other side of the break here. Okay. We'll go from there. This episode is sponsored by the podcast Father and Joe. Father and Joe aims to bring individuals into a better relationship with God. Each episode discusses an element of the human experience that we all can relate to, as well as questions about faith. What are indulgences? What's going on with purgatory? Why can I mentally grasp the concept of God, but I don't feel him in my heart? During each episode of Father and Joe, we are invited to enhance our relationships, and in doing so, we will improve ourselves and society. Download Father and Joe every Tuesday. We thank you for watching this episode of Local Football Flavor. We know there's a lot of different options out there for you to be doing with your listening and viewing content, so we thank you for giving us a chance. If watching this, you want to become a part of it, you want to have your little sponsor logo right up here at the top, you want to have a message down here at the bottom, please reach out to us, localfootballflavor@gmail.com. We're always looking for more guests, more sponsors, but above all, if you just want to help us passively, please click that subscribe button down below. We cannot tell you how much that's helping us, giving us more morale, and gets us better guests moving forward. Better guests, better information, better bet results, better fantasy wires. Local Football Flavor, we're here for you. Please be here for us. Now, let's return to the episode. So, Doug, diving into the fantasy world here, we kind of talked in the beginning that all the running backs get hurt, and that's just part of life. But part of your answer was they get hurt is why they get pulled. So it seems that in an ideal world, if they didn't get hurt, the Niners actually would run someone nonstop. Is that an accurate assumption, or is that just wishful thinking?
I would say it's wishful thinking. I mean, if I was in, if I was going to say, if you're trying to staff your team with running backs, don't go for the 49ers. If you're pulling someone off the waiver, or you have someone that you want to sit on the bench, sure. But otherwise, just the Shanahan model is based on keeping fresh backs in. I mean, because the thing is, right, these running backs in the NFL, they're all fast. They all have the ability to accelerate. And but basically what Shanahan's doing is he's just scheming to make sure that their team is not dependent on a single feature back. He's trying to be as dependent on as few players as possible. You can't get around quarterback. If you have an exceptional talent at wide receiver, those are so hard to find. You can't help but be dependent on them. Elite pass rushers again are so hard to find. You can't help but be dependent on them. But otherwise, you want to try to scheme around as many other positions as possible.
Fair enough. So on that note, there's this kind of perception, and I know Aiyuk has gotten hit by this, where it seems like Shanahan just stops liking people and he just puts them in the doghouse or whatever. Why is it always Aiyuk, first of all? Is there something going on with him? Should he be on the avoid list as well? What's going on there?
Boy, this is I'm going to give you a little bit of a confession. I've actually been a little light on fantasy football the last few years because I found that it ruined my fan experience.
I can see that.
It does. It really does.
Yeah.
I hate picking players from my favorite teams because inexorably I'll be disappointed in some way come Sunday.
Yeah, well, and or the coup d'état is where I'm like, okay, let's see. So I go, all right. So I want George Kittle to get a whole bunch of touchdowns, but to get a whole bunch of yards. But the other team has Jimmy Garoppolo starting, so I don't want it to be too many. You get weird things like that, and I'm like, what am I doing? I'm like ruining football. But at least the thing that I've observed is that the way that the Niner scheme works is that it varies based on where the coverage is. And so I think if you get hover coverage over Brandon Aiyuk, then yeah, I think they're not going to push the ball to him, because what I've observed is one of the best ways to win games is to avoid taking you want to take your risks where you have the best odds. And so I think a lot of times it'll depend on where your coverage is at. This is one of the reasons why it's like, I remember there were, like back in the old days, there would be some games where like Calvin Johnson had like 2 targets in a game. People were like, what's going on? It's Megatron. Why don't you throw the ball to him every down? It's like, well, if he's doubled and there's a safety over top, then that means there's somebody else who's either wide open or only on single. Play the odds. If you keep moving the ball, well, eventually they're going to move someone off of him.
Yeah, well, it's obvious that Deebo is the person that you have to shut down with the Niners. I mean,
yes.
There's no fight about that. Basically, looking at, you only got so many resources with your 11 men on the field. You get one extra guy because the quarterback can't block anyone. So Deebo's almost essentially should be double covered every play. If I'm a defense coordinator looking at the Niners, he's the guy who's got to beat me. And Kittle is basically in that same neighborhood too when he's healthy. Yeah. So just by quick math there, Aiyuk seems like he should be the one who's got the lesser load. Is he just flat out not skilled enough to beat one-on-one coverage consistently?
Well, I mean, I suppose, but that's a really deep question because I think is he?
It really is.
I was going to say, well, because the thing is, you actually don't need that much. So if depending on how you scheme, you don't need that big of a window to beat one-on-one coverage. It just means it just means you'll be throwing a lot of footballs through really, really tight windows. And so, now, do I think that Brandon Aiyuk is going to run down the sideline and beat top corners? No, I don't. I don't necessarily think you could put him on a go route, chuck it up there, and just assume that he's going to catch it. On the other hand, it's like, if you time the pass correctly out of a break, do I think that you can get a whole bunch of completions and probably get him to break away from a few people for some monster plays? Absolutely. So a lot of it just depends on how you game plan and use them.
So when we think about what we talked about earlier in the show, and we think about Trey Lance and his potential, and suppose that they keep Jimmy Garoppolo as well, that they don't trade him until midseason, the potential for the 49ers offense to succeed, who would you say in the skill position set of wide receivers, who do you think needs to be in the mix more than they were last year?
Well, let's see. I mean, so I think frankly, I mean, I feel that since Deebo Samuel was so successful, as you said, he is there. People are going to automatically push their second person on defense toward Deebo Samuel until they have to pay from somebody else. It feels to me like George Kittle is your most natural second target. The question is going to be whether he can stay healthy for the entire season. And then, of course, I think Brandon Aiyuk is your natural after that. But then, of course, people get hurt, and then you end up finding that's when you get the who's this person, and then they get 10 catches and 150 yards. You're like, oh my god,
Gotta pick him up.
That's just how the NFL goes.
So at the end of the day, is there anyone pushing Aiyuk for that third slot, or is it just basically he's getting it by default?
So yeah, I don't necessarily say that I feel like there's a that there's a real natural push for Aiyuk. I would right now I would say that if and when somebody gets hurt, just because it's the NFL and that's going to happen, that I think that's when you'll have a chance for somebody to get on the field and see what they can do.
Got it. So there's,
at least my observation is that usually that's what happens, is because most coaches will go with somebody who they know, unless there's an enormous talent differential. 49ers didn't pick anybody high enough in the draft to where there's an on-paper talent differential that's high enough to displace real game experience.
And
that makes sense.
It seems like, Doug, what Joe's trying to ask you is he needs to draft Brandon Aiyuk. Is it okay if he drafts Brandon Aiyuk? That's what he's asking you right now.
I was going to say I think Brandon. I mean, if you're talking a mid-late rounder, I think Brandon Aiyuk might not be so bad, just because like on a week in, week out, he's probably not going to be your WR1 or WR2. But he's going to have some breakout weeks. There's going to be a few weeks where you're like, crap, man, look at that.
But the high variable guys, those are always awesome.
But it all depends on Trey Lance, though. So we got to hope that Trey Lance makes his progressions, like you said it earlier in the show. That's going to be really important for him to get to Aiyuk, which may be his third progression on any certain play. And if he can't get there, well, then he's not going to do anything.
Correct. On the other hand, if he does get there, then there's a really good chance that Brandon Aiyuk will end up getting a lot of touches and a lot of yards, because, like we said, there will be a lot of rolling coverage to try to just keep people on Deebo Samuel and George Kittle. So that means that there will be a lot of looks available for Brandon Aiyuk. Inevitably, it'll just be a matter of whether Trey Lance can go through those read progressions and then make the throws. I mean, I know it can make the throws. It's just whether you can go through the read progressions without getting hit.
Yeah. So on that note of, we've been talking about injuries being a big part of the Niners. Two cool questions here. First is, with that being known, and there's no position in football more important than a quarterback, are they going to have him kind of tethered to the pocket, or are they just going to let him scramble whenever he feels like it?
I mean, I don't know why you would draft Trey Lance and then try to push him into a pocket. I mean, it's I don't necessarily know that you want to have. I mean, if the only reason why I would keep Trey Lance, I mean, if I put my Kyle Shanahan hat on, I would probably try to keep him in the pocket at least at the beginning, just to get him experience with making those read progressions, because at least what I've seen, and one of the reasons why I've historically not been keen on running quarterbacks after past a couple of seasons, is people who are really fast start relying on running instead of making reads. Like Tom Brady, I mean, he is brick slow. He has to make read progressions. He isn't outrunning anybody. Peyton Manning was the same way. Eli Manning was the same way. Eli didn't make as many read progressions as Peyton Manning, but we'll let that go. And but that's the thing. Yeah, the quarterbacks who are slow, they have to learn how to make read progressions. Now, of course, I also have a little bit of a bone to pick, because I think most quarterbacks nowadays have really bad footwork. That's why everybody goes to the shotgun, is because nobody knows how to do time crossover steps anymore. But anyway, I'm getting old school on you here.
Well, I agree with that. It's easier to run out of under center. It should be the basis of all of it. You more balanced offense.
Well, precisely, yeah. I mean, because I think at least what I, if I were designing a contemporary offense, it would principally be, probably, a single back tight ends, tight end 3 wide receiver set, under center, because then it's like, you can run out of that. You can do a 3 or 5 step drop, a 3-step drop. You can very easily hit something on a short pass pattern out of a break, and it's there's a very low chance you'll get sacked within the time for a 3-step drop. A 5-step drop, if you have somebody who with superior speed, you'll have a chance to get downfield. And I mean, I don't know if anybody would do a 7-step drop now. If you do that nowadays, you go in the shotgun. But of course, people don't practice footwork anymore, so they just do shotgun and they just do like a stutter step backward and then chuck it out there. I think that's lazy football, but
question on that.
That's a very San Francisco answer, actually.
Question on that one. So when we think about the way defenses are playing in recent memory, and we think about how the NFL has its rules set up, there is definitely a lot of room for wide receivers, and defenses aren't getting the calls as much as the offenses are. So does this give Trey Lance an advantage if Shanahan is able to help him work on those read progressions? Does it give him an advantage? Whereas a couple years ago, when we see, like a guy like Lamar Jackson coming into the league, where, his second option is, I need to get out of here, I need to run, and he's really good at it. It doesn't necessarily make Baltimore a very good team, but he's a great player. So does that give Trey Lance an advantage over guys that came in a couple years ago and had to learn defenses a different way?
I think so. I think so. I mean, because fundamentally the way that I think about it is that pass defense is ultimately now more about pass rush. Just because I think the idea of having a shutdown corner is, to the extent that it still does exist at all, I think is getting further and further away from a reality. I think you can get to where you have a good corner that makes it hard to fit the football in the window. The old days where you can have somebody like Deion Sanders, put him on somebody one-on-one, and you just knew that they weren't going to get, that they weren't going to catch anything. I think that's over. Just because even if they don't catch something, all they need is 1 or 2 PI calls. Now you just march down the field and you can at least pop a field goal. Most likely you can, figure out a way to poke it in the end zone.
So that's very, very fair. So, all right. So I guess the last question, because we can't talk about the Niners and their quarterbacks without bringing up Jimmy. So he's obviously very different than Lance. He's much more statuesque, much more under the read progression style. First off, you guys went through when he was hurt and not having a real backup.
Yeah.
Is there a notion to keep him just for that fear, or is it because his contract is so big, I'd rather have that cap money in next year's offseason?
Yeah, and so if it was, if it's me making the decision, I'd say, the cap hit's too big. That is a lot of weight to carry on your cap, your cash flow, but then also, having somebody get paid $25 million who's not starting, that's not great for your locker room.
That's so fair enough. So with that being said, the number one rumor that's out there is Cleveland for Hunt, and obviously Hunt brings a lot of skills to the table where it's perceived that he'll bring a lot, but we also thought that last year with the 2nd round pick, and they played the 6th round guy instead. So if putting your Niners hat on, does it make sense to get Hunt, or would you rather have picks?
Let's see. So generally speaking, I think draft picks tend to be overvalued. I think because there's so that's I'm going to give you my long way of saying I'd rather have Hunt than picks. And the reason why is because generally speaking, I found that draft picks tend to be overvalued. Is people think, okay, if I have a draft pick, I have a chance at the next Tom Brady. You have an infinitesimally small chance at the next Tom Brady. Statistically, you will. I think the overwhelming majority of draft picks never play in games, and of the ones that do, most don't start, and of the ones that start, most of them are in the first 2 or 3 rounds. And so, unless you're getting a pick who's in one of those kind of first 2-3 rounds, statistically, your chances are not great that they're going to amount to anything. Now, of course, exceptions happen. That's why we do the draft every year. And so, but the thing is that, if you can get a player with known talent, known experience, and real game footage that you can evaluate, that gives you a lot of very valuable information that you don't have from a draft pick. It takes an entire unknown factor off the table. And I think I would say, especially in the contemporary era where the chance that you're going to retain a player for their entire career is so much lower than it used to be, I think that even skews the balance more toward existing players than draft picks. I mean, most particularly because anybody you bring in and trade out Jimmy Garoppolo for, you're going to gain a ton of cap room. So you don't even really have to worry about the cap impact.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, perfect. So, like I said, we definitely had to bring up Jimmy here at one point. And then one thing we always ask the guest here, because being in different networks, you guys are exposed to the other conference. You're exposed to Fox more than us. We're at CBS.
Yeah.
So, is there any announcer crew that when they show up, you're just like, I'm so glad this guy's announcing the game? Or is there anyone like, oh my God, if I got to listen to Ian Eagle one more time. Is there anyone that really irks you that way as far as bias for or against the Niners?
Well, I mean, just networks in general tend to be East Coast based, so the Niners never get love. I just come to accept it. But and as far as announcing crews, I'm a little bit jaded. I view all the announcing crews as basically talking paper plates because they all say the exact same things, occasionally with a little more color, but it's usually blithely obvious statements that are somehow proclaimed as though they're insightful. Well, you're really going to have to stop the pass game if you want to contain them. Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Deebo Samuel is just ruining everybody's defense. Got to stop him. Yeah.
Fair enough. Enough.
It's like in the old days, people would say, "Oh, they should really put somebody on hover on Michael Vick." Wow, I can't believe you have these penetrating insights.
and based upon all the conversation we had, that actually is probably the most predictable answer of any of the questions I've asked you. So sorry for throwing a bad one out there. But to conclude to today's show, I want to give you a chance, Doug, here to if there's anything about the Niners that we should have discussed and we missed. Please let's have a chance to tell it here, and then we'll conclude the show by letting you tell the people what's going on in your life.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let's see. So I think let's see, as far as Niners football wise, I feel like we've covered a lot of it. I think the thing that I would say just from a broader perspective is, I personally am just fascinated about the idea of figuring out what is being, kind of what is overemphasized and underemphasized, and then creating a strategy around that. I find that infinitely fascinating, which is a part of why I'm a 49ers fan, because that's just really kind of how the legacy works.
That makes sense.
And yeah, exactly. I mean, and in a slightly different way, I think that's really a lot of how fantasy football works. Also, it's because, of course, right, you have your draft order, and there's your certain no-brainer draft picks, and then typically about the time you get to the fifth or sixth round, that's where you say, okay, none of these are locks, and now I have to figure out, okay, how do you round out your team with the people who either if somebody gets hurt will be moving up the depth chart and we'll start getting consistent numbers, or somebody who has a chance for for 2 to 3 really big pops. I'm going to date myself with this one, but the one that I distinctly remember was there was a running back for the Atlanta Hawks back in the day. No, Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Hawks is basketball. TJ Duckett.
I love TJ Duckett.
Oh yeah, exactly.
TJ Duckett's the man.
Yeah, he was my running back too for like 2 or 3 seasons, because he never had any yards, so he was late in the draft. Half the time I could pick him up off waivers, but about once every 3 games he'd have 3 touchdowns.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, and so I think those are some of the things you want to look for. Is going to be, okay, typically, generally speaking, in fantasy, people look for yards. Yards are what drive draft position. So a part of what you want to figure out is, okay, who are the people that are going to be your red zone contributors that probably won't get a ton of yards every week, won't get a ton of touches every week, but every now and then are just going to blow up the point boards because for whatever reason, they get, for whatever reason they say you get a fumble recovery on the 10-yard line, and you pop it to your tight end 2, and that ends up happening 2 to 3 times. As I think Kyle Juszczyk did this a couple of times. There were.
Yes.
I think there were a few games where you had like 3 touchdowns, and like, who the hell is kind of Juszczyk? I think that's kind of that's the philosophical underpinning of for fantasy, is I would say that when you start getting into those mid rounds, is figure out who are the people that are that won't have enough yards to where anyone takes them seriously, but have a chance to just blow up the red zone.
Perfect. Perfect. And let's give you a chance here for a couple of minutes to talk about what brings you here and what you're selling here, Doug.
Sure. Well, so I run a podcast myself called Terminal Value. So if you want to just go to the site directly, it's terminalvaluepodcast.com, or you can just look up Terminal Value on Apple, Spotify, whatever, and my stuff will come right up. As far as my business, what I do is I actually partner with companies to help them reduce their contract-based expenses. So what my team does is we will come in and we structure your contracts in a zero risk manner. So in other words, we don't get paid until we save you money. So there's like literally no risk on your part. And if you want to learn more about that, just go to terminalvalue.biz and then just go to the contact form or fill out one of the informationals, and then we'll get in contact.
Beautiful. And those links will be in the description as well. We
Perfect.
Thank everyone for being out here watching today. And this has been Local Football Flavor.
Thanks.
Thank you for being a part of today's episode of Local Football Flavor. We ask everyone who's watched to please click that like button and subscribe. It obviously helps us a tremendous deal to come up for new fans. If you did want to be a part of the show, there are definitely links down in the description below, both to be a guest and to help us out as being a donating partner. You can have all kinds of fun things like behind me, instead of having a little Steelers teddy bear, we can have your logo or description. We can have your logo here on this football instead of the legendary Notre Dame Fighting Irish. So all of these things are available. Please click there and please watch the next episode to find out more about another team in the league that is also being lied about, that the national media just doesn't have time to get right. But we do. That's why we exist. Local Football Flavor.